This is more than just a channel. It's a chronicle of the human condition in all its messy, beautiful glory. From heart-wrenching loss to breathtaking triumph, we capture it all in high definition. Subscribe now and become a permanent part of our unfolding cinematic history.
My son set up a smart home speaker for me on Father's Day. I didn't ask for it. I didn't want it. But he carried it in with that easy grin of his, the one he'd had since he was 6 years old, and said, "Dad, this is going to change your life." He had no idea how right he was. 3 weeks later, a retired FBI agent who lived 2 doors down knocked on my door with an expression I'd only seen on men who deliver bad news for a living. "Frank," he said quietly, "we need to talk about that device in your kitchen." I almost didn't let him in. I wish now I'd called my son first. I didn't. And that decision saved everything I had left. Hello, friends. Thank you for being here with me today. If something in this story speaks to you, please like this video and subscribe. We'd love to have you stay. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We have listeners all around the world, and every name matters to us. Before I continue, a note. Some details in this story have been adjusted to protect privacy. Names and certain specifics have been changed, but the truth at the center of the story, the warning inside it, that's as real as anything I've ever lived through. I turned 67 last spring. Father's Day came 3 weeks after my birthday, the way it sometimes does. And I woke up that Sunday morning the same way I'd been waking up for 4 years, alone in a house built for more people than lived there now. The coffee maker clicked on at 6:15, just like Margaret had said it before she passed. I never changed the timer. I don't know why. Habit, maybe. Or maybe some part of me still liked pretending the house wasn't as quiet as it was. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, up in the western part of the state where the mountains make the mornings feel smaller, more contained. I retired at 64 from 31 years as a civil engineer for the county. Bridges, drainage systems, road infrastructure. Work that mattered. Work that was done now. My days had a shape to them still. Morning walk, coffee on the back porch, a little woodworking in the garage, dinner at 6, but it was a shape I'd drawn around empty space. My son Ryan was 38. He lived in Raleigh about 4 hours east, with his girlfriend, a woman named Cassandra I'd met twice. Ryan called most Sundays, usually around noon. We talked about football, about the weather, about things that didn't require either of us to go too deep. He was a good son in the surface ways. He showed up when things were truly broken. But the middle ground, the ordinary weeks, those he kept his distance from. That Father's Day, he drove up without telling me. I heard his truck in the driveway around 10 in the morning and walked to the front window thinking it was my neighbor pulling in wrong. But it was Ryan, tailgate already down, lifting a box the size of a small microwave. I opened the door before he knocked. "Happy Father's Day, Dad." He held up the box. "Got you something." I told him he didn't have to do that. He said he wanted to. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen counter, and started unpacking it the way young people unpack things. Fast, efficient, already knowing where everything goes. It was a smart home hub, one of the high-end ones, the kind that controls lights, locks, temperature, plays music, answers questions. A round device with a small screen, matte gray, about the size of a large coffee can. "You can ask it anything," Ryan said, plugging it in. Weather, news, reminders. You can even set it to call me if you need help with something. He smiled. It's voice activated. No buttons. I looked at the thing sitting on my counter. Margaret had been the one who kept up with technology. She had a smartphone 10 years before I got one. I was still using a flip phone when she passed. "I don't know that I need it," I said. "Dad." He said the word with a patience that almost sounded practiced. "You live alone up here. What if something happens? What if you fall? What if there's a problem and you can't get to your phone?" He gestured to the device. "This stays on all the time. It's always listening. It can call for help. It can call me. Always listening." He said it like a comfort. I remember that now. I thanked him. We had lunch together, sandwiches and chips at the kitchen table, and he showed me how to use the thing before he left. Ask it the temperature. Ask it to play music. Ask it who won the game last night. He drove back to Raleigh by 3, and I stood in my kitchen with this new glowing device on my counter, feeling the way I often felt after Ryan visited. Like I'd been checked on. Like something had been managed. That evening I asked it to play something. It played Sinatra, Margaret's favorite. I stood there in the kitchen and let myself feel something I hadn't felt in a while. Like someone was thinking about me. That was the first mistake. I need to tell you about my neighbor before I tell you what happened next, because without him, the story ends differently. Ray Calloway had moved in 2 doors down about a year after Margaret passed. Retired after 24 years with the FBI, field office out of Charlotte, mostly financial crimes and cybersecurity. He was 72, quiet, the kind of man who moved like he was still paying attention to exits. We'd become friends the slow way, over fence-line conversations that turned into porch coffee, that turned into Thursday dinners when neither of us felt like cooking alone. Ray never talked much about his work, but when he did, I listened. 11 days after Father's Day, Ray came over on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the garage working on a birdhouse frame, and he walked in without knocking the way he'd started doing. He had a cup of coffee in one hand and the careful expression on his face that I hadn't seen before. "Frank," he said, "what's that device you got in the kitchen?" I told him Ryan had given it to me for Father's Day. He set his coffee down on my workbench. "Mind if I look at it?" I followed him inside. He stood in front of the device for a moment, not touching it, just looking at it. Then he asked me to show him the app, the one Ryan had installed on my phone to link everything together. I handed him the phone. He was quiet for a long time, scrolling through settings I'd never opened. "Frank," he said finally, "this device has been configured to share audio to an external account." I didn't understand what he was saying at first. It's set to record and transmit, not just activate when you speak to it, continuously. He looked up at me. "Someone linked this to an account that isn't yours. Whoever set this up, they can hear everything that happens in your kitchen." The garage had been warm when I walked in. It didn't feel warm anymore. "Ryan set it up," I said. I heard how hollow that sounded. Ray handed me back my phone. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He'd spent 24 years learning when to let a man think. "I want you to call me before you do anything," he said. "Don't confront him. Not yet. Can you do that?" I said I could. I wasn't sure I could, but I said it. That night I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the device Ryan had given me. It sat on the counter glowing soft blue at the base, the way it always did. Patient, quiet, listening. I thought about Ryan at 6 years old, standing in the garage doorway, watching me work on a cabinet project, asking every question he could think of. "Dad, what does that tool do? Dad, why does wood split that way? Dad, can I try?" I'd handed him a piece of sandpaper and shown him the grain. He'd worked that wood for an hour without being asked, careful and serious in the way small children are when they feel trusted. "I want to build things too," he'd said. "Like you." I put my hand on the back of his head and said he could build anything he put his mind to. Margaret had taken a photo from the doorway, neither of us knowing she was there. That photo was still on my mantel. I got up and went to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, Ray came back and brought a former colleague of his, a woman named Doris, who still worked cybersecurity consulting out of Charlotte. She was maybe 55, direct in the way that people are when they don't have time for softness. She spent 40 minutes with the device, and my phone, and a laptop she brought in a canvas bag. "It's a continuous audio feed," she confirmed. "Set up through a secondary account tied to the device. It's not a default setting. Someone chose this. Deliberately." She looked at me. "How much does your son know about your finances?" I told her Ryan knew the basics. He knew I had the house, paid off. Margaret's life insurance had settled 4 years ago, $320,000. I had a pension from the county and a modest retirement account. Nothing extraordinary, but enough. Enough for someone who needed it. "Does he know you updated your will recently?" I had. 8 months ago. I'd meant to tell Ryan, hadn't gotten around to it. The new will left the house and most of the estate to a land conservation trust Margaret had supported. Ryan would receive a portion, not everything. I hadn't told him yet. Doris looked at Ray. Ray looked at me. "Frank," he said, I think you need to hear some things the way they sound from outside your house. I'd like you to act normally for a few days. Use the device. Talk in your kitchen the way you always do. Say some things." He paused. "The right things." I understood what he was asking. I wasn't sure I was ready to believe what it meant. But I nodded. I started Thursday morning. I made coffee, stood at the counter, and spoke into the ordinary air of my kitchen. "Been thinking about that land trust," I said to no one. Margaret's old attorney called again. Thinks I should reconsider before finalizing. I poured my coffee. Maybe Ryan's right. Maybe it should stay in the family. I let the silence sit a moment. Should probably call him this week. Talk it through. None of that was true. The attorney hadn't called. I hadn't reconsidered anything. But I said it the way a man says things to himself in his kitchen. Not performing. Just thinking out loud. By noon, Ryan had texted me. "Hey Dad, been meaning to call. Want to come down to Raleigh this weekend? Or I could drive up. Cassandra wants to see you." He hadn't suggested a visit in 4 months. I replied that I'd think about it. 3 dots appeared. Then, also, totally random, "But have you thought any more about the estate stuff? No rush, just want to make sure you're taken care of." I set the phone face down on the table. The next morning, I said I'd been dizzy getting up from the chair, that the stairs had been giving me trouble, that I might need to think about whether the house was still practical for one person. Ryan called that afternoon for the first time in 6 weeks. He asked how I was feeling. His voice had that careful quality, the one that isn't quite concerned but wears its face. I told him I was fine, probably just tired. He said, "Dad, if things get to be too much, you don't have to manage alone." A pause. "There are options. We could talk about them." Options. We could talk about them. Options. We could talk about them. Options. I asked what he meant. "Nothing right now," he said quickly. "Just thinking ahead, like you always taught me to." I got off the phone and sat in the kitchen for a long time. Saturday, Ryan called again. It was the 3rd time that week after months of Sunday calls only. He mentioned Margaret's attorney unprompted. Said he'd been doing some reading about estate planning, about how it gets complicated when property is involved. He said he just wanted to make sure I was protected. "Dad, I love you. I worry." His voice was even, measured, kind, and still I almost believed him. That's the part I have trouble explaining even now. 40 years ago, I taught that boy to ride a bike in the street in front of our house in Morgantown. He'd been terrified. He kept saying he was going to fall, and I kept saying I had him. I ran alongside him for half a block, my hand on the seat, and then I let go, and he didn't know it for another 10 yards. When he realized, he laughed out loud, the kind of laugh kids have before they learn to be self-conscious. He circled back and said, "You let go, and I didn't fall." I told him that was the idea. He threw his arms around my waist in the middle of the street. "You always hold on just long enough," he'd said. Margaret had stood on the porch taking a photo, calling out that we both looked ridiculous, and meaning the opposite. I came back to the present in my kitchen, with the device glowing blue on the counter, and my son's voice still in my ear, and I had to set the phone down before I said something I couldn't take back. Sunday, I walked the neighborhood loop I do every morning, about 2 miles through the old residential streets up toward the ridge. When I passed Ray's house, he was already on his front porch. He nodded toward the chairs, and I sat down. I told him what had been happening. Every call, every text, the timing of each response to whatever I'd said in my kitchen. Ray listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Frank," he said, "this is bigger than a son who wants to inherit. Someone's been coaching him." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "He's moving too fast, too organized. Have you ever met Cassandra's family? Do you know what he does for money these days?" I realized I didn't. Not specifically. Ryan had left the engineering firm he'd worked at in 2021. Said he was freelancing. I hadn't asked enough questions. Ray made a call that afternoon. 2 days later, he came to my kitchen with a printout. Ryan's girlfriend, Cassandra, had a brother named Marcus Shields. Marcus was 41. Prior conviction in Tennessee for elder financial fraud, 2019. Charges involved a scheme in which he'd helped a woman gain power of attorney over her widowed father, then systematically liquidated his accounts before the father's health had deteriorated enough to legally justify the arrangement. The father had died 2 years later in a facility, nearly penniless. Marcus had served 8 months, probation, restitution never fully paid. I sat down at my kitchen table and read the paper twice. He found Ryan, Ray said. Or Cassandra found Ryan. Hard to know which. Either way, your son is in something he may not fully understand the shape of, or he understands it perfectly. He looked at me with the steady eyes of a man who'd spent 2 decades sorting those two things apart. Either way, they're moving toward the same place. I asked what he thought they wanted. The house is paid off, Ray said. Your estate is unresolved. If someone could establish that you need managed care, or that your judgment is compromised, or simply get you to sign something, amend the will, grant power of attorney. He let it trail off. $320,000 life insurance settlement. The house, which I'd had appraised 18 months ago, at just under $480,000. The pension, the retirement account. When you lay it all out in the column, it looks like a number. From the inside, it's just a life. A life Margaret and I built together over 38 years. And someone had decided that life was available. I went back to the kitchen that evening and stood in front of the device for a long time. Then I talked. Been thinking about that power of attorney, I said to the empty room. Maybe it's time. Ryan's the only one left. Should probably give him access to the accounts, at least while I sort out the estate. I paused as if considering something. Going to call the bank Monday. Start with the investment account. I went to bed. I didn't sleep again. Monday morning, I called the bank before I said another word in that kitchen. I spoke to the branch manager directly, a woman I'd known for 12 years named Patricia. I told her something was wrong. I told her to flag my accounts, deny any third-party inquiries, and to call me if anyone asked about anything related to my finances. She asked if I wanted to come in. I said yes. At the bank, I sat across from Patricia and Ray, who I'd brought along, and laid out what we knew. She pulled my account records. 3 months ago, someone had called inquiring about home equity line eligibility on my property. The caller had identified herself as my son's girlfriend, assisting with family financial planning on my behalf. I hadn't authorized anything. Patricia flagged everything. That afternoon, I went to see an attorney. Not the one who'd handled Margaret's estate. A new one, a younger woman named Sandra Reyes, who specialized in elder law. I sat in her office and told her everything. She listened with the practiced calm of someone who had heard versions of this before, which was its own kind of grief to understand. She updated my will that week, iron tight, with instructions specifically noting that no power of attorney had been granted or was anticipated, that all previous informal conversations about estate planning were not to be considered binding indication of my wishes. Ray called in a favor to a friend still active with the Bureau. Not an official investigation, not yet, but a set of careful eyes. That Friday evening, I sat in my living room and spoke into the kitchen from 20 feet away. Just got off the phone with Patricia, I said, loudly enough. She said the investment account transfer can happen as early as Wednesday. I'm going to let Ryan have access. We can figure out the rest of the estate after that. I let a pause settle. Probably time. I turned on the television and waited. Ryan called at 8:14 that evening. He said he was glad I was thinking about this. He said he wanted to come up Sunday, if that was okay. Just to go through some paperwork together, make it easy. His voice was warm, familiar, practiced. He said Cassandra and Marcus would come too. Just to help. I said that sounded fine. Then I sat in the dark living room with the television murmuring, and I let myself feel the full weight of what I was about to do. Wednesday morning, Ray had made calls. A detective with the Asheville PD named Garrett was looped in. Ray's contact at the Bureau had looked at Marcus Shields' financials, which had not improved since Tennessee. He was carrying debts I didn't know the full shape of. Cassandra's name appeared on 2 of them as co-signatory. Sunday came bright and cold. The mountains were clear in the early light. I made coffee and stood at the back window for a while before they arrived. Ryan got there at 10. He hugged me at the door, and for one moment with my arms around him, I felt the whole weight of 38 years. the garage, the bike, the photo on the mantel. I let go. Cassandra was pleasant and careful. Marcus was the kind of man who smiles without his eyes moving. He carried a leather portfolio. We sat in the living room. Ryan laid out some papers on the coffee table. Durable power of attorney, account access authorization, a document establishing him as primary agent for financial decisions. Just precautionary, he said. In case anything happens, you know. I looked at him for a moment. Really looked at him. Before we get to that, I said, I want to show you something. I called out toward the hallway. Ray walked in. Behind him, Detective Garrett. Marcus stood up immediately. His chair caught the edge of the coffee table. Mr. Shields, Garrett said, please sit back down. Ryan's face went through several things in about 3 seconds. Confusion first, then something that looked like calculation, then something that might have been shame, though I couldn't be sure. Ray placed a recorder on the coffee table. He pressed play. My voice filled the room. The things I'd said in my kitchen over 2 weeks. Stage confused, manufacturing doubt, planting a trail. Then Ryan's voice on the phone, responding to each one within hours. Then the bank inquiry from 3 months ago. Then Cassandra's name on Marcus's debt documents. Marcus said nothing. He looked at the door once. The account transfer you were expecting, Garrett said quietly, was a setup, Mr. Shields. Ryan was staring at the table. His hands were flat on his knees. Cassandra started to say it was all a misunderstanding. Garrett asked her to hold that thought. He looked at Marcus and started walking through the specifics clearly and methodically, the way men do who have done this before and have no interest in drama. I looked at my son, Ryan. My voice came out level, quiet. He looked up at me. Tell me you didn't know what this was. He held my eyes for a moment. Then he looked back at the table. That was my answer. I stood up and walked to the back window and stayed there while Garrett finished. I didn't watch when Marcus was formally detained. I didn't watch when Cassandra was walked through what cooperation might look like. I heard Ryan's voice once low and fast, and then Garrett's, and then nothing. Ray came and stood beside me at the window. You all right? He asked. No, I said. He nodded. He didn't offer anything else. That was why I trusted him. Marcus Shields was arrested that afternoon. Cassandra was brought in for questioning and eventually cooperated, providing information about how the scheme had been structured and how it had been applied to at least 2 other families before mine. She accepted a plea arrangement. Marcus faced charges in Asheville compounded by the outstanding matters from Tennessee. He was looking at federal time. Ryan was not charged. He'd been a participant, yes, but Cassandra's testimony made clear that Marcus had structured things so that Ryan's exposure was limited and his understanding of the full picture was, at least arguably, incomplete. Whether Ryan had chosen not to understand, I'll never know with certainty. There's a difference between ignorance and willful blindness, and the law draws that line more sharply than a father does. His attorney called me 2 weeks later. Ryan wanted to reach out, wanted to explain. I told the attorney that if Ryan wanted to explain, Ryan could sit across from me without a lawyer present and say the words himself. He hasn't done that yet. I changed the accounts. The will stands as Sandra rewrote it. I removed the power of attorney language entirely and put a note in my own files explaining that any such documents should be verified directly with Sandra before being considered valid. Ray showed me how to review the smart device's linked accounts. I unlinked everything, reset the device to factory settings, then boxed it and left it in the garage. I still have the photo on the mantel. Ryan at 6, both of us in the street, his hands on the handlebars, my hand on the seat. Margaret calling from the porch. I don't know why I haven't put it away. Maybe because the boy in that photo was real. Whatever happened in the years between that afternoon and this one, that boy was real. And I don't know yet whether I'm grieving him or just waiting to understand how we got from there to here. Some evenings, I sit on the back porch and look at the mountains, and I don't think about any of it. The ridge holds the last of the light longer than you'd expect. Margaret used to say Asheville had the longest sunsets of anywhere she'd ever been. I don't know if that's true, but I sit there until the light goes and I let the quiet be quiet. Ray comes over Thursdays. We don't talk about it most weeks. Last Thursday, he brought a piece of walnut from a downed tree on his property, the kind of dense, close-grained wood that's good for small projects. He set it on my workbench without saying anything. We worked for an hour in the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a house built for more people. My wife is 4 years gone, and my son is 4 hours away, and the distance between us now is measured in something that has no miles. But I own my house. I own my name. I made every decision that needed making, and I made them with clear eyes. At 67, after everything, that turns out to matter more than I would have guessed when I was younger, and took it for granted. I don't have a smart device on my kitchen counter anymore. I have a coffee maker that clicks on at 6:15, and a back porch that faces west, and a neighbor who brings good wood and asks only the questions that need asking. I asked Ray once if he thought Ryan had really known the full extent of it. Ray was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The question that matters more is whether your son will eventually ask himself the same thing." I've thought about that most days since. Here's what I want you to take from this, whether you're my age or you're watching because someone you love is, quote, "The people who want access to your life don't always arrive with demands. Sometimes they arrive with gifts. Sometimes they arrive with concern. Sometimes they say, 'I love you,' while they're already doing the math." You're not paranoid for paying attention. You're not paranoid for asking questions. And you are never too old, never too settled, never too trusting by nature to protect what you spend your life building. Update your will with an attorney who represents you alone, not someone recommended by a family member. Freeze your credit. Ask your bank to flag your accounts for third-party inquiries. Know your neighbors. Build the kind of relationships where someone will knock on your door and say, "We need to talk," before it's too late to talk. I learned all of this the hardest way. At 67, in my own kitchen, listening to a device my son gave me and understanding for the first time what it meant that it was always listening. If this story reaches you and it helps you ask one question you weren't asking before, then something good came from all of it. And maybe that's enough. Stay sharp. Stay clear. And remember that the most dangerous invitation often sounds exactly like the one you've been waiting for.